is an independent house better, like a villa or a row house, or should I go for an apartment?
So having your own piece of land, I think, is a huge USP for a lot of the homeowners. The experience in the villa is much nicer. In apartments, there would generally be a lot more restrictions. Over time, say maybe over 50, 60 years, the building itself actually does not have much value. Actually, it will outlive its lifespan and you will have to bring it down.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ashish Acharya. I'm the founder of Propsoch.com. Propsoch is India's first expert-led home buying platform where we give home buyers detailed insights and assistance in their home buying journey. Today, we are doing an expert interview with Mr. Atul Saraff. He's one of our key team members in helping home buyers choose the right home. He's also the co-founder of Saraff and Sharalaya Design House. And they have been instrumental in the design and the development of multiple projects in Bangalore. Both of them are architects from MS Ramaiah Institute. Atul, if you could give us a little more detail about your firm, your background, and the kind of work that you do, it would be very good for our audience.
Sure. So as you mentioned, me and Roshan, we both are graduates from MS Ramaiah. I graduated about 10 years ago, Roshan about 8 years ago. So we have about that much work experience. After graduation, I've gone on to work with a couple of the really good design houses in the city. So I had an opportunity to work with Mistry Architects. They're based out of Indiranagar for a few years. And for the last about 6 to 7 years, I've been working with a large builder firm known as Total Environment. Right. Again, they're also like fairly commonly known. The focus of all the places where we've worked has always been very design centric, of creating very good experiences for the customers, of creating a very good living environment. And that has somehow kind of gotten ingrained into our way of thinking and our way of working also. So that's the USP of our design firm. It's about creating a very good and a very comfortable environment.
Fantastic. So, Atul, diving into the discussion straight. So we are here to actually help home buyers make the right decisions. That's what Propsoch stands for, and that's why we have like-minded professionals like you working with us, right? So the first question which typically a home buyer during a discovery stage thinks of is, is an independent house better, like a villa or a row house, or should I go for an apartment? What are your views on both these different types of housing, and what are the pros and cons of each of them?
I think the pros and cons of both are very straightforward. The pros of one are, of course, the cons for the other. So if you look at a villa, the great thing about that is any villa development, the land parcel that you get is very clear and very, cleanly defined. So having your own piece of land, I think, is a huge USP for a lot of the homeowners, right? They would prefer that.
Right.
Second thing is, of course, if you buy a villa, you will get some kind of a landscape or garden area, which is generally something that could be missing in most of the apartments these days, right? And from something at a larger level like that to something a little more smaller scale, it's just the conveniences like parking right next to your house, right? You might have an attached garage or a parking area and you simply park and you walk in, versus driving into the basement or like the sub basement and then going to an elevator core, then going up. That experience of an apartment versus that of a villa, the experience in the villa is much nicer.
Right.
And I think what we've noticed is, in general, I would say there are a little more loose and free with customization in villas. You can make a lot more changes. The degree of changes allowed is higher. In apartments, there would generally be a lot more restrictions. There's very less that you can actually do inside to make it feel like your own. And apart from that, I would also say that the density of the population in a villa development would be expected to be much lower.
Right.
In any kind of apartment, high-rise kind of construction, the density of the population is much higher. More number of families per square foot of space. In villas is much lesser. And villas also generally tend to get you a higher degree of privacy for the same reason. Lesser people, little more spaced out. So you get a higher degree of privacy. So there are a whole bunch of pros for villas, of course, but
Yeah.
at the same time, the factors which are in favor of apartment is, of course, one is cost. Once the land component comes down, immediately the cost of the unit itself comes down drastically. For like the same area of
Right.
built-up space, a villa versus an apartment would generally work out a lot. More. Second thing is the location. So if you see the land parcels available in the city, I would say are limited. If you're looking at new developments in terms of villas, generally they would tend to be a little bit further away. There are very few villa developments that are within city limits, but apartments you might find more easily. Right. So if location is a factor for you, then definitely apartment becomes like your go-to choice, right? And finally, of course, views. Villas generally G+1, G+2, that range, right? So your view is essentially the villas around you. If you're at the edge of the property, maybe there's a chance you're looking out. Maybe there's a chance you're looking at a garden. But that's pretty much the extent of it. In an apartment, if it's a high-rise, you have a chance of a great view of the cityscape and stuff, which is not really possible in a villa. So these 2-3 factors are there in favor of apartments.
Understood. So yeah, and I think affordability would play a very important role.
Definitely. That is very much in favor of apartments, affordability.
Right. No, absolutely. And interestingly, nowadays there are a few projects where you have both villas and apartments, right? And
mix, yes.
You also have a mix of some amount of commercial and retail, like integrated townships. So Bangalore has seen a very fair share of its own integrated townships, right? What are your views on these mammoth projects with all sorts of assets?
I 100% feel that they are the way to the future. I think that they kind of address a lot of issues with the way that developments happen. And in that sense, actually, Bangalore is a little different than most of the other rapidly growing cities in India. If you see, our apartment culture is much larger in proportion. And you also see that we've quickly evolved to the stage where we realize that you can't just do apartments. You need to have a mixed-use development where you might have different types of housing units in the same place. Or you might have housing with commercial and retail. So this trifecta between the three, housing, retail and commercial, that is office spaces, I mean when I say commercial, right?
Yeah.
When you have all three in the same development, I feel its usability goes up like tenfold.
Yes.
Right, because they're all practical needs which kind of support one another. If you have an office space there people are likely to rent or buy the houses there. And if people are staying there, they are very likely to use the retail functions, right? So they all support one another. They strengthen one another. So in that sense, we are seeing this trend in most of the builders. If you see Prestige, Brigade, most of their developments, they have a mix. They would have a mall in the same property, or they would have a hotel in the same property, right? So it's kind of moving in the right direction, and I do see this kind of growth in the future. I think everyone's going to slowly move to this kind of a model.
Right. You're so right that everything is in one integrated project where literally it's walk to work. People probably have a better work-life balance. You don't have to take out your car every day. There's a lot going for these integrated townships, but there's also this concept which we are tracking at Propsoch, which is called density of the project, where we basically say number of units divided by the number of acres in the project will give you the density of the project. Now, and there are several projects which have high density. It all depends on FSI and location and stuff. And there's some projects with low density. Now, what is the impact for a home buyer or for someone who's living there when it comes down to density?
There are a couple of things. I would say it's a little, complex and almost like you have to sort of be able to visualize the impact. So one thing which is very straightforward is what we call undivided share of land. So whatever is the total land area of the property, if you divide that in the proportion of your unit ka area, you will get your undivided share. Usually it's mentioned as a part of your purchase document when you buy the property from the builder. Right? So if the population keeps increasing, so that means that the undivided share would keep reducing. Now, essentially, over time, say maybe over 50, 60 years, the building itself actually does not have much value, right? eventually it will outlive its lifespan and you will have to bring it down.
Right.
At that point, the only thing which will be of value is your share of the undivided land.
Right.
It's kind of like you own stocks of that entire 10-acre property, you own certain number of shares. So the value of shares is actually the only thing of value that you have. So as a buyer, you always want to see where are you getting a very good value of UDS. So as the density increases, the UDS amount that you have comes down.
Right.
So that is one kind of correlation. Apart from that, in general, it is a strain on everything in the property. So for example, if you see the services, if it's the power, water supply, or if it's the common areas, if you see the clubhouse and the garden spaces, the shared amenities, right?
Yeah.
As the density increases, it means that many more people are using the facilities. And beyond a certain point, it might be overstraining this thing. Like you might end up in a situation where you go to a clubhouse, it's always crowded. Right. You never feel like you're able to use the facilities, right?
Right.
So it's a very, tentative balance that the builder has to maintain. They have to know how much population is okay and where they should cap it off, and they should not build more units.
Right. Now, this is a good point on the clubhouse, because that's another parameter which we typically track, which is clubhouse area per unit in the project, right? So a lot of developers see that, they have 30,000 square feet clubhouse, 40,000 square feet clubhouse, but it's also important to understand how many members are they actually catering
to. They're catering to, yes.
Yeah, so that's something which we kind of provide so that people can compare, project A, project B, and project C on the same parameters, right? So that's something which is very interesting you brought up. Now tell me, you touched upon services in the project, right? So when you talk about services, what exactly do you mean?
So there are several services which essentially go into bring a project to life, right? It's kind of like how a body needs a circulatory system to move the blood, and you need to breathe and everything. Similarly, a built structure needs several services for the structure to kind of be usable. So if you start with the basics, it's basically like water, right? So essentially in water, we would say there might be about, we consider about 5 sources of water for a project. Okay. So one is, of course, most projects will tell you we have, Kaveri connection.
Yes.
Or they try for it, at least they apply for it, and maybe the connection comes later. Apart from that, you might have existing bore wells at the site. And then sometimes if there's low water during the summers and stuff, they call in tankers. To fill in the water. And then finally we have rainwater, which it's kind of a mandate from BBMP that you have to kind of capture and store and use rainwater for projects of a certain size. And the last one would be treated water. So if you have some kind of a treatment system, if there's treated water which comes out of it, you can use it for certain functions, like you can use it for landscaping and things like that, right? Maintenance work. So when you go to a property and if you're trying to talk to them, if you manage to get in touch with a technical person, right? You need to understand how are they handling all their water requirements. So each apartment or each individual would consume, say, roughly around a certain amount of water, like the standards are around 140 liters or so a day per person. So okay, that is the total requirement. I have so many, maybe 1,000 people living there. And then you need to talk to them about what is their plan, how are they addressing the water demand. So some of it could be through Kaveri, some of it could be through borewell, and what are the contingencies that they have in place in case one of these systems fails. Like if there's no Kaveri supply due to, very bad dry spell.
Correct.
Then where does the tanker come in? Where does it unload the water? Is it like one of those poorly designed places where the tanker is on the road and blocking traffic and causes other technical issues? Or is there a proper designated space for these kind of things to happen so that, it's well thought out from before? Or is the provision not there at all?
Right.
So one is you have a system, but you should always anticipate that something could go wrong, and do you have a backup system to kind of fall back on, and it'll kind of take care of you through the tough times. Absolutely. So the same goes for electricity. Generally, everyone would have a BESCOM connection.
Right.
But you need to talk to the builder about what kind of power backup are they giving you. Is it complete power backup? Is it only your lights and fans?
Right.
Sometimes they tell you that it does not cover what they call the heating circuit, right? Which is your geysers and your refrigerators, air conditioning systems. So it might vary which kind of power backup, and then plus on that they'll also tell you the time frame. Either they give you 24-hour complete power backup, that no matter how long there's a power outage, they'll cover it. Or maybe they're just covering for a certain amount of time, just like a couple of hours.
Sure.
Right? When their systems kind of run out of power after that. So these questions are important, because if, for example, the builder is not able to provide, then you might want to build in something of your own in your house later. You might want to then buy your own UPS and stabilizer and those kind of systems. But if the builder is providing it, then you don't need to do it at all. Then it's just a waste of money for you. Right. And I think the last two which kind of come to mind right now is, one is about how are they managing their waste. So any property beyond a certain size, it is mandatory for them to have a sewage treatment plant. And once that's all kind of treated inside, then after that, the recycled water can go and be used for your common areas, your landscaping and all of that. So that reduces your water load, what we've spoken about earlier. Right. So STPs or sewage treatment plants are very important. And it's not required for individual houses, of course, but if it's a large development, definitely it's mandatory. And of course, the last one is something we have all kind of seen and struggled with in the last few weeks, which is about the rainwater or the stormwater drainage system. That's something that's it's a built-in network of services across the entire development about how it captures the rainwater and then eventually directs it somewhere. So of course the primary stop would be to collect the rainwater first. And once it kind of overflows that capacity, then you use it to recharge the groundwater. So they dig kind of like the inverse of a bore well, right? You dig into the ground and you allow the water to go in to recharge the groundwater. And then finally, even if the capacity is larger than that also, then the overflow goes into the stormwater drains made by BBMP. The idea of this multi-step process is that, one, it reduces the load on the main drain channels which are running outside, and two, benefits the environment. Like recharging groundwater is good for the environment in general, and of course storing rainwater and reusing it is a very good source of water. It's one of the cleanest sources you might get.
Absolutely. And you need to maximize on that.
Exactly.
So now that you touched upon the controversial topic of Bangalore floods, I have a question there. So a lot of projects today have been built either with nalas and Raj Kalways and drains passing through them, right? Or right adjacent to them, right? Or very close to lakes, right? And traditionally Bangalore has had this whole network of lakes where, if there's an overflow, it goes to the next lake at a different gradient and prevents flooding in those regions. But because of the rampant development which has happened in the city, thanks to the whole tech boom which has happened here, the flooding situation has occurred this time in a very serious manner. So how does the home buyer actually evaluate a project, given that every second project in Bangalore is either next to a nala or has a nala passing through its boundaries? So should people just shun those properties, or is there a very sensible scientific way of deciding what is the right way to buy a home in these projects?
I think there's a very the main USP of having a property near a lake as such is basically the views, right? Nalas are essentially the connecting conduits which carry overflow from one lake to the next when the water levels rise. So you would see a nala somewhere near the lakes, right? Essentially, just connecting one to the other. Absolutely. I would definitely say that you should go ahead and buy properties which are near nalas. No issue with it. But the main challenge is that you have to make sure that the builder has followed whatever are the bylaws. Right. And this is very easy and straightforward to do. Generally, you have nalas. There are some very specific and clear guidelines about the distance that has to be left. And the builder would have uploaded those documents into RERA. So that's all easily available to you already. So as long as you're looking at the documents and you have someone to kind of cross-check and make sure that it's fine, then there's absolutely no issue.
Understood. So the problem really arises when someone violates the norms, the buffer zones, and actually develops something. That's when probably the flooding gets active.
It's a two-step thing actually. One is, of course, people can end up doing violations where they are building on the nala, which affects its capacity, right, to carry the water. So they're essentially reducing the size of the nala itself by building on top of it and doing some other thing, either blocking it completely or giving like a route around the building.
Right.
So these things affect the capacity of the nala. The other thing is just poor maintenance could also be the culprit.
Oh, yeah.
So the nalas need to be cleaned out regularly, periodically. So if the civic bodies in your area are strong, they're proactive, generally they would do the cleaning and the maintenance exercise before the monsoons.
Absolutely.
If you feel that, okay, it's not happening, maybe just by raising awareness among the people itself, you need to raise the issue and make sure that it's all cleared out.
Yeah.
Because if it's filled with a lot of dirt and stuff, that also reduces the capacity of the nala. And as that reduces, again, the overflows would happen the same way, even if the builders have not really violated in any way.
Understood. Right. Sure. So, coming to the design of these projects, and you're the expert at this, right? You've worked with a very big, prominent developer also in the city, Total Environment. What are the top 3 things that a builder keeps in mind as he goes about designing the master plan of a project? Like, what are the absolute, non-negotiables for a builder as he goes about designing his master plan?
For any major builder, I would definitely say it's all about, the first most important thing is getting the maximum value out of any piece of real estate.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you have a property which is sort of next to a lake, right?
Right.
And even if you're developing as an apartment, generally what tends to happen is the units which have a better facing go at a higher value, right? Which are facing the view of the water or something like that. Right. And if there are half the units which are facing the other side, they generally would end up going at a lower value.
Absolutely.
So when you're in the design stage, they try to look at it in a way, how can you maximize the views which are in favor and increase value of the building itself.
Sure.
And the same happens even for example, Vastu. So even if builders or the design team, for example, even if we personally may or may not be following Vastu in our lives, but we realize that as a customer, the majority of the people would be inclined to buy a unit that is Vastu compliant. Right. And if you see, even in the pricing structure given by most builders, Vastu compliant units generally go for a higher value.
Absolutely.
As compared to a unit that may not be Vastu compliant.
Yes.
But at the same time, that's the reality of an apartment.
Sorry. How compliant can large-scale projects be with Vastu, given that you don't get the shape of the land, the direction it faces, and you have to consume FSI, like you rightly said. You have to maximize the value. So
these are all really big challenges.
Sorry?
Yeah, and like if you notice, like these are all the really big challenges for any design team. And if you notice, like a tower, generally you'll have like a lift core or a staircase or something in the center. Yeah. The units which are all around it would essentially be like one unit, and then it gets copied or it gets rotated around. So essentially what happens is one unit may be Vastu compliant, but the mirror image of that unit definitely will not be, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So how do you balance that? So instead you design a totally different unit where the entry is like, in the other direction, or how do you do it? So these kind of things become challenges for the design team, and they try to resolve it in a way where they try to at least address some of the core requirements for majority of the units, and maybe you'll have to do only a handful of units, which will end up selling at a marked down value because they don't satisfy anything. They neither have a view nor are they Vastu compliant. Right. So they would try to make sure that that's kind of minimized. Like most of the units should have some value for the clients, where when they buy it, they should feel happy that it has this USP which is kind of working in my favor. Correct.
I think the Vastu principles basically evolved from a ventilation perspective, if I'm not wrong. Is that compromised in units which are not Vastu compliant today? Or are there...
No, I would say like Vastu is actually, as we study it, right, it's actually a lot deeper, and we actually realize very practical implications of the things which are proposed. But at the same time, I also feel that Vastu was developed for the kind of housing which we had in those days. Right? It was usually looking at independent houses, maybe G plus 1. Right. But you're not looking at something more than that. So if you see, there were principles which say that, your property always has to have the entry towards the north or the northeast.
Yeah, yeah.
Which kind of works in favor for you in the sense you also have these four main corners. They say the southwest should always be the tallest,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
northeast should always be the lowest.
Correct.
And if you think about it practically, the way the climate is in our country, the way the sun goes, right?
Yeah.
The southwest would always end up casting a shadow onto the northeast and keeping the rest of the house cool then.
Okay, okay.
Right? So the shade is actually working in your favor then. So there are benefits.
Right.
And it works for a certain kind of setting. So like for an independent house, for a villa, I could really see Vastu kind of playing a good role.
Sure.
But for an apartment, it works very differently, I feel. It's hard to kind of get everything. But we try to keep the guiding principles in mind that there should always be cross flow of air in each room.
Yeah.
So we feel that keeps a positive vibe in the space. There should always be a good amount of natural light in every space. We feel that also brings a lot of positive energy into the space. And of course, some basic things about the main door facing and stuff. Mostly clients would be particular about that. But you can't capture everything. But if you can capture at least some of the basics, I feel it keeps most people happy.
Right. No, I think like you rightly said, you really can't capture everything. So, typically the other thing which influences ventilation is the tower which is next to you, right? A lot of times in group housing projects, you have towers which are pretty close to each other, or if you're on a lower floor and there's a really tall tower opposite your home, then you are kind of in the shadow of that building most of the time, right? So can you give us some inputs on the distance between towers? What is ideal? What are the norms? And also with respect to building footprints itself, like what is the right amount of open space which needs to be provided in projects?
Okay. So in general, if you see, there would be some kind of bylaws prescribed by the government. Right? They have a rule which talks about what they call ground coverage, which is the size of the footprint of your building with respect to your overall site.
Right.
And they say it can't cross a certain value. So depending on the size of the land, it could be say maybe 30%, 40%, 50%, right? Smaller lands, larger footprint they allow.
Yeah.
Larger lands, the footprint they keep reducing it.
Sure.
So of course, ideally a builder has to follow that. These days what we're seeing is builders are giving much larger open spaces though.
Okay.
Like some of them are boasting 90% open space and all that, right?
Yes.
Which is like very, very large, much larger than what the government mandates. In terms of how much open space is required, that's really kind of hard to tell. Okay. I personally believe it's not just about having open space, but what you do with it. Right? If it's accessible landscape, if it's an open playing area, if children and even other adults are able to go in and use it, that's great.
Correct.
Right? If it's just hard paved, if it's just roads or driveways and it's not really usable in some sense, then there's no point, right? Like, what do you do calling it an open space? It doesn't benefit you in any way.
Correct.
So I feel what you do with it is more important. It can be a smaller space and it doesn't need to be always on the ground. I feel that open spaces can even be on terraces of buildings. It can be on the roof.
Yeah.
Right? You have nice ventilation. You have a nice amount of lighting there. People would use that more probably.
Right. As long as access is provided and the safety and security is taken care of. Right. Fantastic. So now, for a regular home buyer, what are the top 3 things he should look for when he's deciding between 2 floor plans? Let's say he's got a flat, he's got an option to buy an apartment in the 15th floor with say 1600 square feet and on the 10th floor of a different tower, which is 1800 square feet. Now, which is inherently better? What are the pointers that he needs to look for when he goes about deciding this?
It's a little complex, so it really comes down to personal preferences in a large sense. But a couple of things that I would probably, like my personal preferences, what I would keep in mind is one, definitely the facing of the unit. And when I say facing, I don't mean the main door. I'm not talking about from Vastu point of view, but I'm saying that the majority of the windows. Okay. Generally, you would see most of the windows of the rooms would be facing either one direction or a combination of 2 directions.
Yes.
Generally, right? That's the way that very few would have like 3 side windows. So if my bedroom windows are either facing east or they're facing the north, that's great. because that lighting is very, very good for you. It doesn't heat up the house, and you can kind of leave your windows open through the day and stuff. It's very nice. If your windows end up facing south or west, if it's getting the light from the setting sun, then definitely that's something that brings in a lot of heat.
Okay.
And you always end up putting your blinds or your curtains, and you're always running your AC during the afternoon times because the house gets very hot. Right. So I think the facing, it plays a very important role.
Okay.
That is one thing. Second thing is, of course, if the difference is just between the 15th floor and the 10th floor, right? If it's not too many levels, then the question is also about value for money, I would say.
Okay.
So if there's not a very large difference in the view, I would prefer a slightly larger unit at a slightly lower floor, because the floor rise charge would make some difference in the overall cost, right?
Sure.
They might end up costing almost like similar, if not the same.
Okay.
So definitely, what I like to do is divide the total cost by the carpet area of the house. Right? I think that's something that even you're doing, rather than by the super built-up area, because super built-up is not something you really end up using.
You've touched upon a very important point, because what is actually the difference between super built-up and carpet area and RERA carpet area, and now there's a concept of also CREDAI carpet area, right? So that's news to you also, right? So I recently found out that some developers do mention on their brochures that this is the CREDAI carpet area, right? So now for a consumer, end of the day, he's going to be living within these four walls, and while the amenities and the common lobby areas are important, I think the value for money is also measured by how much space he's getting within his walls, right? So so as they go about taking a decision on which floor plan to choose, do you think the efficiencies would change between the floor plans in the same project?
I think efficiencies don't really change too much within the same project, but you could see a large difference between efficiencies across different projects. Like say builder A in location 1, maybe the same builder in location 2 also, there could be a good difference in the efficiency, or between builder A and builder B in the same location. Right. It's a very design centric kind of a thing. In general, I prefer to go for properties which have a much higher efficiency.
Right.
Like I would compare the efficiency across properties, because that's really where you're getting the good value for your money.
Right.
So practically what ends up happening is carpet area is essentially, there are some minor differences between the different definitions, but essentially carpet area is what you're actually living on.
Yeah.
It is the space within your walls of your apartment. And there could be some minor differences in the definitions by the different things, like RERA carpet versus CREDAI carpet versus something else, right? So that's what carpet area is. Super built-up area and super built-up area, they are essentially this carpet area plus add-ons. So super built-up area includes a certain amount of share of the common spaces. Right. So what the builder tries to say is, it's not just your apartment. I had to build a corridor, I had to build the elevator, I had to build the basements. Right? So he has to load all of that on somebody. So he says that actually I am giving so much more square footage for you. Sure. He's loading that as well. And while that is a fair enough point, but the difference between what is the carpet area to the super built up area, tells you the story of how well the property is designed. Right. If the difference is too much, it means there's too much inefficiency in the design. The corridor spaces and everything is very large compared to how much it should have been. If the corridor spaces and everything is much lesser, and the difference between RERA carpet and the super built up is lesser, that means the building was designed very efficiently. So that means even in terms of funding, the builder spent most of his money on the apartment and very less on all this common stuff.
That's a great way of looking at it. And from a same financial perspective, a consumer ideally should be just dividing the overall cost of the unit by the RERA carpet area, right? Across projects.
Yes.
Because that would ideally be an apple-to-apple comparison for.
And ideally, if you see the breakup of the cost structure when you buy an apartment, they will charge you separately for parking. They will charge you separately, separate cost for the common amenities for the clubhouse.
Yes.
Right. So they are sort of recovering some amount of that separately. So if you can separate that, just divide the cost of the apartment, that should give you a very real figure about how efficient each builder is. You should just compare that across builders.
Right. No, I think this is a very deep topic, and probably we should do a longer session on carpet area and saleable area and what is the right way to look at an apartment. So great. I think these are a few questions which I had with respect to impact of design on home buying decisions, and we'd love to have you again on a call with us where we kind of dive deeper into some of these topics we just discussed. Right?
Definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Atul. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.